Moscow is pouring huge sums of money into its defense industry, both officially and covertly. However, corruption is sapping these efforts, and the industry is unable to fulfill defense orders, writes SERA. Obozrevatel media outlet recalls, not so long ago, economists Sergey Aleksashenko, Vladyslav Inozemtsev and Dmitry Nekrasov released a report in which they claim that with current military expenditures, the Russian economy has enough margin to withstand the war for at least a few years. According to them, the consequences of the war and sanctions, such as high inflation and degradation of production, will manifest themselves years later, while at the moment they do not pose a threat to the economy. However, the data provided by the former financier of Morgan Stanley and Bank of America, Craig Kennedy, in his newsletter, are not so rosy for the Kremlin. The expert notes that the Kremlin has created a parallel, shadowy system of financing the war against Ukraine at the expense of preferential lending. This made it possible to achieve a sharp increase in corporate borrowing by 71%, or up to 19.4% of GDP already from the middle of 2022, more than the total income from oil and gas and the expenses of the defense budget for the period from the fall of 2022 to the fall of 2024. Up to $250 billion of this amount went to finance war-related and often non-creditworthy enterprises, which became the main trigger of inflation. According to Kennedy, soon the government will have to take on obligations to save the loaned enterprises, which in total can eat up to half of the entire budget. After that, the Kremlin will not be able to finance rearmament of the army unless the West softens the sanctions. This information largely explains how Moscow manages to finance the war all these years. In addition, the majority of defense enterprises began to work in 3 shifts, and some even switched to a round-the-clock working mode and work even on holidays. However, even taking into account all these efforts, the production of military products, it is not as successful as planned. As of September 2023, at least 419 heads of workshops and factories failed to meet the tasks of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation and were fined. Journalists emphasize that they took into account only the appeals of employees on FAS decisions, while the actual number of failed orders may be much higher. For example, Konstruktorsko Buro Pribro Strojenia produces almost all high-precision weapons for the front. 2 months before the war, the plant presented a new development, a guided missile for ex-UAVs. They promised to deliver ammunition there by April 2022, but as of the end of 2023, they have not appeared in service. Journalists call the lack of Western components, personnel shortages and corruption the main reason for supply disruptions. Its scale became roughly understandable when, under the new Minister of Defense Andrei Belousov, large-scale purges in the department began. Then, colossal embezzlement was relieved in the areas of rear support of the army, construction and even disposal of weapons that had gone out of circulation. Thus, at the end of last year, the Military Prosecutor's Office approved an indictment against the ex-head of the disposal service of the main armored personnel carrier of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, Colonel Ilya Timofeev. The main military utility is accused of receiving bribes in the amount of almost 3 million rubles and extorting bribes. It is interesting that Alexei Zolotarev, a contractor of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation close to the Kremlin, who is directly responsible for the disposal of weapons, not only earned billions from his business in Russia, but also purchased a luxurious villa in the Côte d'Azur in France, as well as Maltese passports for himself and his family. It is him that the company Translom receives from the Ministry of Defense scrap metal and non-ferrous metals without any competitive procedures.
President Donald Trump said Tuesday that he wants the U.S. to take ownership of the Gaza Strip and redevelop it after Palestinians are resettled elsewhere. According to Associated Press, he made the remarks in a joint press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump claimed the proposal had widespread support. "I can tell you, I spoke to other leaders of countries in the Middle East, and they love the idea," he said. "They say it would really bring stability, and what we need is stability." This first visit of a foreign leader during Trump's second term comes amid lagging support for Netanyahu in Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister faces competing pressure from his right-wing coalition to end a temporary truce in Gaza and from war-weary Israelis who want the remaining hostages home and the 15-month conflict to end. Netanyahu told reporters a lasting peace isn't possible if Hamas is left standing. Obviously you can't talk about peace either with Hamas or in the Middle East. If this toxic and murderous organization is left standing, any more than you could make peace in Europe after World War II if the Nazi regime was left standing and the Nazi army was left standing. Trump reiterated that he feels Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and said if they get one, that will be very unfortunate for them. But the president said Iran would find it very beneficial if the country can convince him that they won't develop a nuclear weapon, saying in that case, they're going to have an unbelievable future. Turning to the other major conflict, Trump said destruction in Ukraine has those cities looking as bad as Gaza, and worse, but he did not offer details on what kind of peace he's seeking in that country's war over Russia incursion. We're talking to the Russians, we're talking to the Ukrainian leadership, Trump said, without offering details. He did not answer a question about whether he would demand the Russians leave Ukrainian territory.
How will you be assured that you will take out all the hostages? And then we will...
We're working very hard to get all the hostages. The word is all, and we are working very hard.
So obviously, you can't talk about peace neither with Hamas or in the Middle East if this, toxic, murderous organization is left standing. Any more than you could make peace in Europe after World War II if the Nazi regime was left standing and the Nazi army was left standing. You want a different future? You got to knock out the people who want to destroy you and destroy peace. That's what we're going to do. I think that will also usher in, actually, the peace with Saudi Arabia and with others. And I think there will be others too.
Yes, ma'am. We want to give people a chance at life. They have never had a chance at life because the Gaza Strip has been a hellhole for people living there. You just can't keep doing, you have to learn from history. You can't keep doing the same mistake over and over again. Gaza is a hellhole right now. It was before the bombing started, frankly, and we're going to give people a chance to live in a beautiful community that's safe and secure, and I think you're going to see a tremendous outflowing of support. I can tell you, I spoke to other leaders of countries in the Middle East, and they love the idea. They say it would really bring stability, and what we need is stability. Yes, sir. Please.
You said earlier today that it was tough for you to implement these sanctions on Iran, but you did indicate that you were willing to negotiate with them. What would that look like, and are you in conversations with them?
I really want to see peace, and I hope that we're able to do that. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. I'm not putting restrictions. They cannot have one thing. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. And if I think that they will have a nuclear weapon, despite what I just said, I think that's going to be very unfortunate for them. If, on the other hand, they can convince us that they won't, and I hope they can, it's very easy to do. It's actually very easy to do. I think they're going to have an unbelievable future.